When trust breaks in a relationship, the wound isn't always visible. Sometimes it's not found in actions at all, but in language, the quiet, everyday words that begin to shift meaning long before the truth surfaces. Betrayal doesn't always start with deceit. It begins in the subtle changes of tone, the pauses that last half a second too long, the comfort that feels strangely distant. And while many people search for proof in messages or timelines, the real evidence is often hidden in how someone speaks when their heart begins to drift away. Every conversation carries an emotional frequency. When guilt or confusion enters, that frequency changes. The words might stay the same, but the energy behind them becomes uneven. You can sense it before you understand it. That strange dissonance when what's said no longer matches what's felt. It's not paranoia, it's perception, and learning to trust that perception is a form of emotional health. When people make mistakes, especially those tied to loyalty, honesty, or affection, their first instinct isn't always to confess. Often it's to protect the story they tell themselves about who they are. Most of us want to believe we're good, even when we've done something wrong. So instead of silence, we reach for words that soften the edges of our guilt. We choose phrases that sound peaceful, even wise, but that actually serve to blur reality. This isn't always manipulation. Sometimes it's the mind's way of surviving its own discomfort. It might sound like, I just need some space, or you're overthinking. On the surface, these words appear reasonable, gentle even. But beneath them, there can be a quiet pull away from truth. When someone's heart is conflicted, language becomes a kind of mask, and tone becomes the only place honesty can still breathe. You may notice that their calmness feels too calm, or that their reassurance feels strangely hollow. That's because guilt doesn't always shout. It rearranges itself into politeness. Learning to hear emotional dissonance is not about catching lies. It's about understanding alignment. When love is healthy, tone, energy, and language all move together. When love is strained, they begin to split apart. A person can say, I'm fine with a steady voice, yet their energy hums with tension. They can say, I love you, and still sound like they're somewhere else entirely. These are not signs of manipulation, but signals of disconnection. And recognizing them early is a form of emotional intelligence, one that protects not just relationships, but mental well-being. Many people misunderstand what happens during emotional withdrawal. It isn't always cruel or deliberate. Sometimes it's the slow retreat of someone who feels ashamed, trapped, or uncertain. They start using language to build emotional distance, not because they want to harm, but because they don't know how to face their own reflections. So they soften their words, speak in calm tones, and hope that the quiet will make the guilt go away. But silence doesn't heal what honesty avoids. Let's look deeper at how this happens. A person carrying guilt often begins to speak in ways that maintain peace rather than connection. They may say, I don't want to fight, or let's not talk about this now. These phrases seem caring, but they actually block emotional repair. True peace comes through communication, not avoidance. When someone repeatedly sidesteps difficult conversations, it's often because they're protecting a version of the truth that feels too heavy to admit. And while they might believe they're keeping harmony, what they're really creating is distance. This emotional distance can be subtle at first. Shorter sentences, fewer details, laughter that arrives a beat too late. Over time, the warmth in their voice fades, replaced by politeness. It's not hostility, it's withdrawal disguised as calm. To the listener, it feels confusing. You sense that something is missing, but you can't quite name it. The relationship feels safe but empty, present but detached. This confusion is what psychologists call emotional incongruence, when words and feelings move in different directions. Recognizing emotional incongruence requires mindfulness. Instead of reacting to the words themselves, listen to what the body and energy behind them communicate, the pause before a response, the sudden need to sound peaceful when tension is clearly present, the shift from spontaneous affection to controlled politeness. These aren't random, they are micro-expressions of guilt, anxiety, or emotional fatigue. And while none of them prove betrayal on their own, they do reveal a need for deeper communication and honesty. For anyone listening, especially those who have been hurt or confused by changing communication, it's important to approach these signs with compassion, not suspicion. When a partner says you're overthinking, it might feel dismissive, but it often comes from their own discomfort with being seen too clearly. Guilt doesn't only distort relationships, it distorts self-perception. To heal, both people must relearn how to speak without defense, to let language become a bridge again instead of a wall. In emotional wellness, this is called congruent communication, when what we say, how we say it, and how we feel all align. Healthy communication requires more than honesty. It requires emotional regulation. A person may be telling the truth, but if their tone carries irritation or avoidance, the message still lands as dishonest. Likewise, someone can speak softly and still be manipulating through omission. The balance between emotion and expression is what determines whether communication heals or harms. Healing communication begins when we stop hiding behind language. Instead of saying, I just need space as an escape, we learn to say, I'm struggling with something and I need time to process it. Instead of you're overthinking, we can say, I understand why you feel uneasy. Can we talk about what's worrying you? These small shifts in phrasing change everything. They transform guilt into vulnerability and defensiveness into dialogue. That is where real emotional growth begins. For many, the fear of confrontation keeps them trapped in linguistic avoidance. They mistake peace for silence. But emotional peace isn't the absence of conflict, it's the presence of understanding. When we use words to delay truth, we only extend the suffering. When we use them to explore it, we start to heal. This is true in every kind of relationship, romantic, familial, or even within ourselves. Because language isn't just a tool for others, it's the way we narrate our own story. Sometimes the hardest part of recovery isn't forgiving another person, it's forgiving ourselves for ignoring the signs, for mistaking calm for care or reassurance for honesty. But self-forgiveness begins when we realize that awareness is not weakness, it's strength. The ability to notice emotional shifts, to feel when tone doesn't match words, is not paranoia. It's intuition refined through empathy. And the more we honor that intuition, the more resilient and emotionally healthy we become. So, when communication in your relationship begins to feel hollow, when the words sound right but the energy feels wrong, pause. Don't rush to accuse, but don't silence your awareness either. Ask questions gently, listen deeply, invite truth, not defensiveness, because most emotional wounds aren't created by lies alone, but by the silence that follows them. Healing starts with the courage to speak even when your voice trembles. Emotional health begins with awareness, not only of how we speak, but of why we speak the way we do. When people experience guilt, fear, or uncertainty in a relationship, their nervous system reacts before their words do. The tone becomes cautious, the phrasing softer, the pauses longer. It's not always intentional manipulation, it's often a biological stress response. The human brain tries to reduce emotional tension by using language to regulate feelings. That's why conversations after a betrayal often sound calm even when hearts are breaking. The calmness is not peace, it's protection. Understanding this helps you listen differently. Instead of judging, you start observing. You begin to notice the mismatch between emotion and expression, a subtle tremor in the voice, or a steady calm that feels strangely unnatural. These small cues tell you not that someone is evil, but that they are divided inside. They're struggling to hold two conflicting truths, the one they live and the one they hide. And until those truths meet, communication will always sound slightly out of tune. In therapy, this phenomenon is known as cognitive dissonance, the discomfort of holding two incompatible realities. A person who has betrayed or disappointed someone they love often lives inside this split. One part of them feels remorse, another part needs justification. To survive that tension, they rewrite the story. It just happened, they say, or I didn't mean to. These words serve a psychological purpose. They soften accountability by turning deliberate choices into accidents. But healing only begins when we stop protecting our mistakes and start learning from them. Emotional healing doesn't come from punishment, it comes from integration. Allowing the self that made the mistake and the self that wants to heal to finally speak to each other honestly. When a person says, I just wasn't happy, it may sound like avoidance, but often it's an unconscious attempt to explain a deeper disconnection within themselves. The healthy way forward is not to silence those words, but to ask what unhappiness really means. Is it dissatisfaction with the relationship or disconnection from the self? Sometimes what looks like betrayal is actually an expression of unresolved pain that was never spoken. If you are the one who feels betrayed, your first task is to protect your emotional clarity. That means not rushing to decode every phrase, but learning to regulate your own response. The nervous system under distress can make you hyper alert, scanning for inconsistencies, replaying conversations, analyzing tone. While awareness is important, overanalysis can harm your mental health. The goal is not to catch every hidden meaning, but to cultivate balance, to listen with both heart and reason. Awareness without compassion becomes suspicion. Compassion without awareness becomes denial. Healing requires both. If you're the one carrying guilt, the path forward begins with honest communication. Avoiding hard conversations may seem easier, but it only deepens disconnection. Instead of saying, let's just move on, Try, I want to move forward, but I know we have to face what happened first. Instead of you deserve better, try, I know I've hurt you, and I'm willing to take responsibility. These words invite healing because they're rooted in ownership, not escape. In psychology, this is called restorative communication, the process of using language to rebuild safety after emotional harm. The body always knows the truth before the mind admits it. You can hear it in the sigh before a sentence, the forced laughter, the quiet pauses that punctuate a conversation. These are signs of emotional suppression, not serenity. When the mind tries to hide guilt, the body leaks it through micro expressions and tone. That's why people often feel something is off, even when nothing overtly wrong is said. The disconnection between what is spoken and what is felt becomes the emotional static that drains intimacy over time. It's important to remember that not every emotional withdrawal is betrayal. Sometimes it's burnout. Sometimes it's the exhaustion that comes from years of emotional caretaking without being met halfway. But when distance is wrapped in the language of calmness, when I need space becomes a habitual pattern rather than a temporary boundary, it signals a deeper problem: emotional detachment disguised as maturity. Healthy space is transparent and collaborative. Unhealthy space is silent and self-protective. You can tell the difference by whether it brings relief to both partners or confusion to one. Many couples unconsciously use language to avoid emotional responsibility. Statements like, "you're too sensitive," or "let's not make this a big deal," sound harmless but actually invalidate the other person's feelings. Over time, this erodes trust and safety. The antidote is empathy-based communication. That means replacing dismissive phrases with validating ones. Instead of, "you're overreacting," try, "I see this really affects you. Can we talk about what's underneath that feeling?" This simple shift turns defensiveness into connection. It transforms guilt into growth. Learning to speak and listen in this way takes practice, patience, and self-awareness. It requires emotional regulation, the ability to notice when your body tenses, when your breathing changes, when your voice tightens. These physical signals often precede the defensive words we later regret. By pausing before reacting, you give yourself a chance to respond with clarity instead of impulse. In relationships, this pause can be the difference between escalation and understanding. When healing from betrayal or any emotional rupture, both partners must learn a new emotional language. The one who is hurt needs space to express pain without fear of invalidation. The one who caused the pain must learn to listen without self-defense. This is difficult because guilt and shame are powerful emotions. Shame says, "I am bad," and guilt says, "I did something bad." The difference matters. Guilt can motivate change. Shame only deepens denial. So the key is to move the conversation away from identity and toward accountability. It's not about labeling someone as unfaithful or broken, but about understanding what emotional needs went unmet and how to rebuild trust through honesty. Forgiveness, when it comes, is not forgetting. It's the conscious decision to stop letting the past control the present. But forgiveness can only exist when there is truth. When someone says, "Can't we just move on?" they are often asking for relief from shame, not repair. True healing asks for the opposite, to stay present with discomfort long enough to transform it. This process is emotional resilience, the capacity to face what hurts without running from it. Emotional resilience doesn't mean you never feel pain again. It means you can hold pain without letting it define you. It's learning to say, "Yes, this happened. It hurt deeply, but it also taught me how to love more honestly." That's what emotional health truly looks like. Not perfection, but awareness in motion. It's the understanding that relationships are living systems. They require attention, truth, and emotional maintenance, just like physical health requires rest and nutrition. For many, the first step in emotional healing is learning to hear themselves again. After trauma, self-talk often becomes harsh and suspicious. You replay conversations, judge your intuition, doubt your worth. But your inner voice deserves compassion too. Instead of asking, "Why didn't I see it?" try asking, "What was I afraid to feel?" Instead of, "How could they do this?" I ask, "What does this experience reveal about what I need and value?" These questions move you from victimhood to self-awareness. They allow pain to become a teacher rather than a cage. So much of emotional suffering comes from misunderstanding what language is for. We treat it like a weapon or a defense, when in truth, it's meant to be a bridge, a way to connect the inner world to the outer one. When we speak from fear, we build walls. When we speak from truth, we build understanding. The tone of our voice, the pace of our words, the honesty of our pauses, these are all part of our emotional vocabulary. Learning to align them is the foundation of psychological well-being. Every healthy relationship is built on communication that feels safe, transparent, and emotionally honest. Yet when trust has been shaken, people often retreat into guarded language. They speak in ways that sound calm but carry layers of unspoken fear. Healing this pattern begins with awareness, not of the words themselves, but of the emotional purpose behind them. Why do we choose certain phrases? What are we trying to protect when we stay polite instead of truthful? The answer often lies in our relationship with vulnerability. Vulnerability is the courage to express our emotions without controlling the outcome. It's saying, I'm hurt, instead of pretending to be fine. It's admitting confusion instead of offering quick explanations. But vulnerability feels risky because it demands surrendering control. And control is exactly what guilt and fear crave. That's why after a betrayal, the guilty mind reaches for soft phrases. Let's just move on, or you deserve better. They sound noble, but they're really ways of managing emotional exposure. They let someone exit gracefully while avoiding accountability. And yet, accountability is the very medicine the wound requires. The most powerful healing begins not with words of justification, but with words of ownership. Sentences like, I understand why you feel hurt, or I can see how my choices affected you, open emotional space. They acknowledge pain instead of minimizing it. They allow both people to see the full truth without distortion. This kind of honesty feels uncomfortable, but it is deeply reparative. Emotional health thrives in environments where discomfort is met with compassion, not defense. To rebuild trust, you must first rebuild emotional safety. Safety doesn't mean avoiding difficult conversations. It means knowing that those conversations can happen without emotional punishment. This is where tone matters most. A calm voice used to suppress discussion feels different from a calm voice used to invite dialogue. One shuts down emotion, the other holds space for it. Healthy communication is not about never raising your voice, but about keeping your heart open even when your voice trembles. If you find yourself saying, I just need space, ask yourself what that space is for. Is it to heal or to hide? If you truly need emotional rest, communicate it clearly. I need some time to process what I'm feeling, but I want us to stay connected while I do. This turns distance into a shared boundary rather than an escape route. When space is defined by clarity and care, it strengthens connection instead of eroding it. For the person on the receiving end of emotional withdrawal, it's crucial to remember that awareness does not equal control. You can notice emotional distance, but you can't force someone to close it. Your role is to remain grounded, to keep your emotional balance even when someone else's actions feel unstable. This is where self-care becomes not just a practice, but a necessity. Journaling, therapy, deep breathing, exercise, and time in nature all help the nervous system recalibrate after emotional shocks. These are not distractions, they're foundations. They give your body the stability your heart needs to process pain with clarity. In psychology, there's a term called emotional regulation, the ability to stay connected to your values even when triggered. When you master this skill, you no longer respond from fear or anger. You respond from alignment. That means you can listen without absorbing guilt that doesn't belong to you, and you can speak truth without turning it into blame. Emotional regulation is what allows forgiveness to eventually become possible, not as a favor to the other person, but as a release for yourself. Forgiveness doesn't mean accepting what happened as okay. It means accepting that it did happen and choosing not to carry the poison of resentment indefinitely. But before forgiveness comes understanding, and before understanding comes expression. That's why silence is so harmful after betrayal. It freezes the healing process. The more both people can safely name what they feel, the faster emotional integration begins. Speaking the truth restores coherence between thought, emotion, and action. It realigns the story that guilt tried to distort. There's also an important lesson here about intuition. Many people describe sensing the emotional shift before the facts appeared. They felt something in the tone, the timing, the sudden politeness. This intuitive perception is a sign of emotional attunement, your body's natural radar for authenticity. In healthy relationships, intuition is an ally, not an enemy. When you learn to trust it, you protect your peace early, before confusion becomes chaos. And when you communicate from intuition rather than fear, your words carry power without aggression. You become a steady presence in a storm of mixed signals. Rebuilding trust after emotional disconnection is a process, not an event. It unfolds in stages. First comes recognition, acknowledging the reality of what's been lost. Then comes responsibility, both partners owning their part in the dynamic. The third stage is repair, the daily actions and conversations that rebuild reliability. Repair is not dramatic, it's consistent. It looks like honest updates, small gestures of transparency, and language that matches emotion. Over time, consistency becomes credibility, and credibility becomes safety again. The final stage is renewal. When the relationship begins to feel alive again, not because the past is erased, but because both people have grown from it. This stage is marked by new language, words that come from awareness, not avoidance. You start hearing, I appreciate you being patient with me, or I'm learning how to communicate better. These are signs of emotional maturity. When the focus shifts from defending the self to nurturing the bond, emotional health is not about perfection, it's about alignment. When your thoughts, feelings, and words move in the same direction. When you speak from that alignment, even difficult truths can be received with understanding. And when both partners strive for that kind of integrity, the relationship becomes a safe space for growth, not just comfort. So if you've ever felt that quiet tension in someone's voice or that calmness that feels too controlled, don't rush to fear the worst. Instead, treat it as a signal, an invitation to look deeper, to reconnect, to heal. Ask open questions, speak gently but honestly. Remember that every emotionally honest conversation, no matter how painful, brings you closer to clarity. And clarity is the foundation of peace. Because in the end, emotional health isn't about never being betrayed or making mistakes. It's about developing the wisdom to recognize emotional misalignment early and the courage to respond with truth instead of fear. Whether you choose to stay and rebuild or to walk away and heal, the lesson remains the same. Awareness is freedom. The truth doesn't destroy relationships, it only destroys illusions. What's left after that is real, raw, imperfect, but real. And real is where love, growth, and peace finally begin.